Good evening and namaskar to everyone. I am Radhika, representing Voices from the Periphery, and it is an honor to welcome you all to today's lecture on understanding dance as a tool for assertions of social identities and power. Before we begin, I'd just like to announce that most of our lectures are live streamed on YouTube, and so is this one. Moving on, this occasion is especially meaningful as we are joined today by one of the most distinguished and path-breaking scholars in the field of performance studies, feminist anthropology, and critical cultural praxis, Professor Umimala Shorkar Munshi. Professor Shorkar Munshi is a towering figure in contemporary Indian scholarship, whose work has consistently challenged dominant narratives by foregrounding the body, especially the gendered, caste marked, and subaltern body, as a site of resistance, memory, and political assertion. A trained dancer and accomplished choreographer, her artistic journey began at the Uday Shankar India Culture Center in Kolkata, where she was shaped by the transformative idioms of Indian modern dance. Her academic path, no less rigorous, led her to a PhD in social anthropology from the University of Calcutta, with a focus on tribal and folk performance traditions. She now serves as the professor at the School of Arts and Aesthetics, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, where she has also served as the dean and chairperson of the Center for Arts and Aesthetics. With an intellectual career spanning several decades, Professor Shorkar Munshi has made indelible contributions to the fields of performance theory, gender studies, ethnography, and dance documentation. She has taught and mentored a generation of students in critical theory, research methodology, and embodied historiography, while also serving as vice president and later network co chair of the World Dance Alliance Asia Pacific. Her academic oeuvre is rich and expansive, including seminal works such as Engendering Performance, Indian Women Performers in Search of an Identity, Dance Transcending Borders, and Uday Shankar and his transcultural experimentations, Dancing Modernity. Her research is deeply rooted in long term fieldwork and a commitment to documenting the lives and artistic practices of women, tribal communities, and folk performers, voices often pushed to the peripheries of mainstream scholarship. Her work refuses to treat dance as a mere aesthetic form. Instead, she explores it as a mode of embodied knowing, a repository of memory, and a medium through which identities are articulated and hegemonies contested. She has powerfully argued that the body itself can become an archive, one that speaks across silences, erasures, and ruptures. Through choreographic works such as Ambapali, Lotus Path, and So We Sit Here, she brings theory to life on stage, often working in collaboration with survivors of violence, trafficking, and social exclusion, using dance as a mode of healing, reclamation, and empowerment. What makes Professor Urmimala Sharkar Munshi's contribution so unique is her ability to fluidly weave together the roles of scholar, performer, activist, and teacher. Her feminist, post-colonial, and subaltern methodologies interrogate the hierarchies of knowledge production, and her pedagogy is infused with a deep sense of ethics and empathy. At a time when questions of identity, resistance, and cultural survival have never been more urgent. Her work stands as a beacon, reminding us that the margins are not sites of lack, but of immense creativity, strength, and knowledge. It is a matter of great pride and joy that we have the privilege of listening to her today. On behalf of us all at Voices from the Periphery, I extend our warmest welcome to Professor Shorkar Munshi. Over to you, Professor.
Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. And, especially after a shortish break from after my retirement from the daily classes, though I've been doing classes regularly, this few months, I have been doing these kinds of special lectures, but this one is really very special to me. It also gives me a chance to kind of put together uh, my initial engagement in terms of what I feel is important in dance studies and why dance studies is not just knowing dance history. Dance in India has always been identified as something that is culturally one of the biggest strengths of India as a country, which also is through a range of cultural policies, we have consistently pushed forth a certain format of cultural practices that become then more performative, more performance, more acceptable, more celebrated as skills, and more powerful as entertainments than others. But dance we do, all of us, all over India. There is a great range of different kinds of dances where people dance for different kinds of reasons. And these are not reasons just linked to entertaining. Of course, there is entertainment. Entertainment is one of the biggest reasons why one dances nowadays, especially what we see in the urban sphere, what we see in films actually make us almost forget that people do dance because they want to. People do dance because they want to communicate. People do dance because they want to celebrate togetherness and also extend solidarity, restructure, reshape friendships, reshape, reassert gender rules, and reframe social frameworks of everyday life. Now, when I will read part of the things, I also want to actually show you some of the things that I have put together in a very sketchy PowerPoint. And I also want to take a chance and make you watch certain videos before I go into the text of my lecture. Because, I have realized that people have people know that there is a lot to know about dance, but when people come for a lecture of mine, most of the pre understood knowledge they bring, pre accumulated knowledge they bring, is related to dance history. Where which dance is there, which dance sculptures are seen in which temples, what are the histories of the classical dances. People might be able to, many of you may be able to tell me the eight names of classical dances that India claims as its classical traditions. But you see, most of us don't think that all dances are equal. Most of us think some are stage worthy, more skilled than the others, and therefore this effort. And thank you for Voices in the Margin. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to actually re-clarify certain kinds of research focus that actually has kept me so engaged through the years. I want to share this PowerPoint. I hope it will happen smoothly. Let me see. Is it visible?
Yes, ma'am, it's visible.
Okay. So here, basically, I have put together random pictures, not historical at all, intentionally. These are pictures which are common for you guys to see here, there, everywhere, and we actually know that, we claim one of our claims is that 2,500 years of dance is in India, and the dancing girl of Harappa is the proof of that. Now nobody knows whether this lady was dancing. Now, of course, there are other parallel claims where the lady's body has been draped with pink saris and she has been called Saraswati, etc. Because there is a deep uneasiness in our society about bodies, dancing bodies in public, and especially dancing bodies that can be viewed. So putting a body on the in the public realms, even now, is something that parents are not easy with. Given that circumstance, there is tremendous amount of dance that is there in our society. And unfortunately, it becomes less and less as we go into the urban, sophisticated, so called, more kind of structured city lives with education, formal education taking the place of informal, societal, community educations. So our life becomes individualistic, our bodies become individual bodies, we lose the community body, we lose the community identity, we lose the ensemble ways of being, and therefore we lose dance, some forms of dance at least. Here, the photographs that you see have Bhimbetka cave etchings, Varli art, Ajanta sculptures. One of the first workshops I attended in my life at the age of 5 with Uday Shankar, and a very contemporary form of two male dancers who you see wearing skirts and experimenting with gender fluidity on stage today, very recently. And also you see Kalbelia dancer, a dancer who is a person who actually it's her occupation to dance. So we are looking at art, we are looking at history, we are looking at everyday life being etched in the way that people danced together, holding hands across their bodies in the cave painting. We look at the Varli art, where you actually can see movement in the way in which the circular movements are etched and drawn, and the art tries to live on in the busy space of Bombay city, where it is challenged every day with total erasure. And then you actually also see labor, you see leisure, you see creativity, so many things together. And you also see discipline. In the class where you see all these children dancing, this is the first step to make possible listening, viewing, and structuring one's thoughts as per instructions outside the body. So you are not telling your body, you are learning to listen to somebody else. That's a great way of learning how to be in everyday life, right? So that's another. This is not education as in formal education where you look at, read stuff, you write stuff, you think stuff. You think with your body here. So therefore, the body becomes, you as you see all these six pictures, body becomes one of the principal things that is activated. And now, with all the gyms and all kinds of artificial stuff, we have created certain ways of using our body. But many people choose not even to know the range of activities that the body is capable of. Whereas in the art practices in everyday lives that we have now put in the margin, we know that those kinds of everyday practices would enable one to communicate with the body almost before they started speaking. So, with the groups of parents dancing, children learn dancing without being taught one, two, three, four rhythms or songs or words or meanings. So the everyday calendars became understandable. The seasons became understandable. Rhythms became understandable. Discipline became understandable. Embodiments became understandable. And also being together became something that is doable, that is practicable. So tremendous amount of functions. Now I want you to look at what does egg people on. Why do people dance? Once people, these words of Pina Bausch, one of very, very, very front-ranking German dance theater practitioner and choreographer, is dance, dance, otherwise we are lost. I take it as one of the principal ideas about identity. If you lose your dance, then you no longer can claim an identity as surely as you could when your dance set you apart from others. And that is one thing that we know now more than anything else, where, say, for instance, when people go, say, people migrate, the first thing they do is to get into a space where two things are happening simultaneously. One is they try to get accustomed to the new place and its culture, its schools, its ways of identifying oneself, dressing, etc. But also, in the back of the mind, there is an anxiety, especially in the minds of the people who are making this choice to go from one place to the other, whatever the circumstance, of losing this scare, the fear of losing one's identity. And cultural practices are what people try carrying to distant lands. And this is something very common to us. We know that so many people from here, whichever place they are traveling from, they carry their art, their culture, their books, their ways in which they can identify themselves to the original space from where they have traveled elsewhere.
Ma'am, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I think the slide is stuck because we are still looking at the first slide.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay. Just one second.
yeah, yeah.
Can you
Now
see
we,
now?
yes, yes. Now we can
Okay,
see.
so let me not get into the full slide mode. Let me keep this. Okay.
Yeah,
So here, dance, dance. Otherwise, we are lost. By Tina Bausch is the heading that I have kept here, and I want you to think through the one of the so many ways in which people have remained in touch with their initial cultural practices. And one of the things that you see is, I will try to show this video now, which is called the ostrich dance. It is, as you can see, this solo is one of the first compositions on the Western scene to amalgamate the modern dance and the African movements. Asadata Dafora, who migrated to the United States in 1929, delivers its choreographic vision of the traditional dance to us. Let's see. Okay. You will have to just tell me if you can see the slide changing. Do you see?
It has not changed yet. If you have changed the
Okay, no,
slides.
then I will just go out of this one, stop sharing, and then do it. Okay.
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah. I've been able to close it.
Yes, ma'am.
Mm. Can you see?
Yeah, and we can hear as well. So. Um, and I will now show another one. Let me just show one or two of the performances and then we can go back to the talk.
पद्धती आहेत ऐतिहासिक या रणाचा मूळ निवासी जीव आणतो परसमातिक मान हिरवा माझा देव आहे वागोबा तुमच्या बाट आमच्या जंगलात मागवा पैसा किती दाखवाल भौतिक सुखाचे दाखवाल भविष्य तुमचे हायला बाटली जगतो हाय तो आता मान प्रगतीची
Ma'am, we can't see the comments.
Yeah, you will. You will.
झाले हाय जगणे दुःख हे पित्र्याचा घालता जनावर
Can you see?
We can see your screen, but it's the video is not playing. It's white.
Sorry?
The video hasn't started playing. Now it is. Now it has loaded.
Can you?
Yes, we can now.
Sorry?
Yeah, we can.
Okay.
We can.
आम्हाला सारं करायचं अरे माणूस म्हणून जगण्यासाठी आम्हाला सारं हे करायचं अरे आज नाही उद्याला मारायचं कशाला माग सरायचं अरे आज नाही उद्याला मारायचं कशाला माग सरायचं हमें ना पसंद है खुदा विकास ना है
विश्वास मेट्रो बनाने उखाड़ो तुम चार जब झाड़ना बचेगे कैसे लोगे सांस घर मेरा जंगल खुला आकाश तुम आए त्रासले नहीं करने इसका नाश प्रकृति का बना वो मजाक यही प्रकृति से बनी मानव जात हो माच रहे हो हमें बाबा जिनके हमसे तुम हमारी जगह बस बचा ये जीने का तरीका तुमको भी चुके करे हमें दबा बचा पक्षी प्राणी की है क्या किसी ने बेदखल कर रहे ऐसा उद्योगी सरकार हमें रहे फंसा हमें बचा के ये बना रहे पैसा और बसा रहे बल्कि सोच भविष्य में इनके बच्चे देंगे इन्हें दोष पर अफसोस वो ना दिख सकेंगे वो सहते हुए अपने अगली पीढ़ी को खुद तुम जियो और जीने दो लगाओ पौधे जब तक जीवित हो मूर्खो उठो अपनी सोच बदलो या ना कुछ बचेगा फिर खोने को जीने को एक है प्राण उसके भी कागज पे तो नाम पहचान आदिवासी हूँ गरीब इंसान कैसे साबित करूँ मेरा है स्थान मैं किसान होगा उतना चौहन प्राणी मेरे परिवार समान तुमसे करो तुम बसे कैसा चलो अपनी ये सोने की बात
गावाचे दारी पडी करान पिकवल आदिवाशान कव कुंड हराम खोरान त्याची केली आदुळदान जर का पुन्हा केला पुन्हा त्याला तेच गाडायच अरे आज नाही उद्याला मारायचं मग कशाला माग सरायचं अरे आज नाही उद्याला मारायचं मग कशाला माग सरायचं
Sorry, but anybody wants to see it can actually go online and search for Wildly Revolt. And because this is one of the most important things that I wanted to show you, that the first one is strongly something that talks about identity, about reclaiming, about nostalgia of what one has left behind in the place where a new place where slaves have left their homes and never to go back, don't know how to go back at all. But bringing the nostalgia, the memory, the love, the sadness, almost as a space of recreating some kind of a way to survive, to escape from the realities, is what you see in the first dance, where ostrich becomes the way in which this animal body, claiming this animal body, is the way in which one claims memories of a distant place. The second one, when you see, it is about resistance. It speaks about resistance in a colony which has had RA revolt. RA colony revolt is not for the first time. It has revolted time and again. In the whole development of Mumbai area, there have been huge amount of deforestation, complete devastation of the ecology on that. And even after this song was sung and it became a symbol of the revolt, they have still had to go through deforestation, even more of deforestation. Many of you must be knowing that. So what I am trying to say here is that these are bodily involvement. It is exactly like how people go to war. It is a kind of a commitment to communicate with the body. And it is not necessarily something that actually follows the mainstream and the upper class, upper caste aesthetic. The aesthetic is of a reclamation of the past often, or a new body reclamation of new rhythms, of new forms of art practice, or even interartistic practice. And you see that in the second one. And I just want to show you one more of the videos, which is just one sec. Huh? Okay. I would like to show you now. Sorry, just one sec. Um, This is a video of the Kalbelia women. I'm not showing the whole thing again. Kalbelia women from Rajasthan. I will go back to my PowerPoint now. Mm, Can you see this?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Um, all right. Um, Now it has stopped responding to me. You still can see it?
We can see the second slide, ma'am.
Yeah, it is in the
Yeah,
second side.
then that's fine.
Gosh, what is happening now? Okay. Yeah. Um, so um, I will go back to speak a bit about Kalbelia because I think that is one of the ideal cases of identity and power pulled together. My first encounter with two female children accompanying their father and uncle in the sand dunes of the Sam Desert near Jaisalmer in October 1979 was very different from whom we see as Kalbelia dancers now. The men introduced themselves as snake charmers from a community named Kalbelia. One of them was playing the wind instrument with double reed they call pungi, while the other was playing the wind instrument, uh, uh, while the other was singing. The girls danced to the music. Their sense of rhythm was noticeably good. Their movements consisted of repeated footsteps consisting of a stamping with the right foot and a response from the left one using the toes. What I noticed was the near perfect right angle between the heel and the toes, created by pressing all the toes of the left feet to the ground. These were dancers too young to have trained formally, but they were dancing on the shifting sands, trying their best to hold their balance, but occasionally falling and controlling their balance. The hands were either raised uh, over the head or spread to the sides or in front with the uh, with the wrist and the fingers moving with agility to the rhythm. They kept looking at their elders, looking a bit scared or as if following their unspoken orders. Child labor, I thought. The uncle explained that performing for the tourists and in the neighboring villages was their family's traditional way of earning, and the girls accompanied the adults as they loved traveling. I asked why were they not in the village school? There was no clear answer. It sparked an interest in what was called performance among the Kalbelia, and I soon found that the women in the community often went in the neighboring localities to dance and sing in order to ask for food and also payment in cash. They were sometimes accompanied by men. The music was slow and concerned with the myths and folk tales, and also the social stories of relationships between parents and children, husband and wife, etc. A lot of the lyrics for the same songs varied from group to group and even from one performance to the other. There was almost no understanding of the formal training for this particular dance. A lot of recent writings and films are available on this form now. One of the sources that mentioned the little known form in 2003 was Rustam Bharucha's book, Rajasthan, where he begins speaking about the Kalbelia by saying, there are approximately 80 different types of nomads in Rajasthan under the generic category of yogi. They provide different technical services. We have different nomadic groups like Kalbelia. The community is still known for the practice of asking for alms. Barucha differentiated them from beggars who are vagrants who beg for a livelihood. He says they provide certain types of services for which the society is obliged to provide them with food. So, at one level, for example, the Kalbelia are recognized as snake charmers. It is still commonly believed that that the after the banning of the snake charming as a profession, the Kalbelia women began dancing to create an alternative occupation. They danced within the community before, now they danced outside and danced to make a living. The claim is as far as it can get, given the complexities of the changes and how the stories of individualizations and representations are almost impossible to get into within a short 10 minutes documentary that has now been produced by the UNESCO. UNESCO has awarded the Kalbelia form of dance the intangible cultural heritage status, making this something of a important art practice amongst the marginal ones. So now there is a hierarchy established for the forms which are known by the UNESCO as the or recognized by the UNESCO as the intangible cultural heritage masterpieces. Masterpieces are those which go on changing themselves with time to survive and also become occupations. So in the local community, the Kalbelia women are still known as people who are prostitutes, who are of questionable character. They are not respected very much, but in this form of dance, when they dance, they become the owner of the space. They become the occupationally, they become powerful. And that is what you see when you see in the film here, in that 10 minutes film. Now, the thing is that which means that dance here has become a certain kind of a tool for negotiation, a kind of social negotiation of for power, for more recognition, for certain forms of social positions that the women are otherwise not given. There are some women who actually claim that, who have become famous with this form, actually says that, it's a kind of a make-believe gypsy world that these women started performing. And the dance gave them that kind of an entry easily. And some of the women have been saying very clearly that she was actually thrown away as a child, as a daughter born to a very poor family, as an act of female feticide. Whereas the mother actually collected her, brought her home, and therefore she survived. This woman actually says now that I don't want other girls to be helpless and be killed. Now we have earned the position of being more powerful as the earner in the family. We have to understand that in many manners, occupation, dance as occupation, is looked down on by the upper caste, the upper class women, where public dancing is looked down upon, unless it is a dance which is very well respected, like a classical dance like Bharatanatyam, Kathak, and you're doing it on stage. Whereas the same form actually provides survival for families where they can actually bargain for their lives even, and bargain for a social space. Here, some of the people who have worked with Kalbelia dancers have, one of them is Komal Kothari, about whom Rusam Barucha was writing in the book Rajasthan, and he was writing about his ethnography and also his documentation of local art forms. So here he says that Barucha writes that Kothari actually mentioned in one of their interviews, the first phase of our international exposure was made possible only because of the direct involvement of our foreign research collaborators. The second phase, from the mid 80s to the early 90s, was organized by the Festivals of India under the administration of the Indian Council for Cultural Relations, that is ICCR. And here, actually, it is notable that these foreign interventions and government efforts, not always very organized, but it has actually given a certain kind of a recognition to these kinds of marginal art forms, which otherwise would not have found the audience and the patronage. So, therefore, it is important to keep in mind that many of these forms have survived because of certain kind of orientalistic eyes that they have been able to, that kind of attention that they have been able to get for themselves. So here, in a certain manner, there is a way in which Kothari mentions that the way in which it shaped the dance was almost like the Jajman system, where what the Jajman wanted, and in this case, these were foreign scholars, foreign entrepreneurs, and also the government here. What they wanted, the curatorial hand, the curatorial kind of wish that was imposed on the dancing body and the dancers, and in terms of how that body should look to be presentable, that made this particular transition from a very marginal a kind of a practice to a more skilled form of occupation. Now, none of this is good or bad here. I'm not trying to put in value judgments. I'm saying that dance actually finds its way into different kinds of spaces, different forms of labor and leisure practices. And therefore, and parallelly exists now alongside Bollywood on one hand and the classical dance. Now let's look at how I want to kind of talk about a little bit more on certain formats of why people dance. Where do they dance? Is it always through training? We see that dancing bodies, people dance when there is rage. People dance when there is nothing else they can do. People dance when they feel helpless. People dance in resistance. And therefore, one of the films that I'm going to show you now is a film of JNU. It's something of a flash mob. act of desperation when you know that JNU had undergone a lot of, you know, external interferences, and the whole university space was being restricted. So we almost kind of staged this as a kind of, you know, surprise occupation, and then we vanished before police could come in. So I just want to share this with you, and then we'll go on to read the rest of the paper. How am I doing about time? Do I have 10 more minutes?
Yes, ma'am, you have.
Okay, all right. So I'll just do the rest here. You can see my back here. Okay, just one sec. Can you see?
Yes, ma'am, we can see and hear clearly.
Can you see the bodies on the ground?
Yes, ma'am.
These are all professors. Can you imagine that, you know, people are holding phone torches and people are lying down? I had just told them that those of you who have problems with your back or your leg or sitting down on the ground, don't do this. This is right at the JNU main gate. Those of you who have gone to JNU know the main gate is like concrete road. So this is just inside JNU main gate. And none of these are dancers, right? So what I wanted to show here is a format of resistance where people people actually come together and can face guns even. So this is what John Martin writes: when we bristle with rage, or start with fright, or resort to gesticulation when at a loss for adequately expressive word, we are practicing the beginning of dance. That's by John Martin in his book Introduction to the Dance. So I wanted to just kind of take you through this before I just finish my lecture today, and I will stop. Did I stop
You've stopped
my
sharing, ma'am.
sharing? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So now I would like to just talk about a little bit of what is the dancing body about. A body that claims history is not necessarily a historical body. It is a body that seeks validation from history. Similarly, a body that represents the tradition through the training of classical dance does not carry only that particular legacy within it, but also is a body structured in the times it lives. Hence, it is a body living in two times. One part of the bifurcated body lives in the past by virtue of its constant reference to a parampara or tradition of learning, while having to update itself constantly with the new ways of learning as an individual in a jungle of free for all neoliberal knowledge explosion in the time of media wars and related competitive dissemination. Hence, the becoming of a body is a continuous process. On one hand, to be respected for what it carries as signifiers, but also to be kept under watch, as it displays different forms of encapsulating of the new times and spaces it chooses or it is forced to inhabit. A dancing body, in the process of creating or representing stories of others through its representative movements, undertakes a hidden representation also of the body of the dancer herself. In presenting the story, she is living it. She can only embody another character in a manner that she understands the emotions or the movements of the character in the story she is asked to enact. The representation becomes a tale of negotiations, mixed with experiences of preparations, pain, hard work, pleasure, and of course, also a constant suppression of self expression that is required to tell a story. And I want to finish it with one example. Let us talk about the Devdasi, the woman who danced in the temples in the past. You know that there was a law that made her a criminal in 1947. As we all walked towards freedom, the Devdasi woman was declared a criminal. And it was only her dance that was stopped. Her dance was taken away by upper caste Brahmin women who went to the city and danced their dances without acknowledging them. They changed the name, the sadir, their own dance was changed, the bodies were changed. It was replaced by upper caste Brahminic bodies from the cities. The songs were replaced with Sanskritic texts and stories, and it became somebody else's story somewhere else. And this woman lost three things at the same go: one, her art, her right to call herself artist, her occupation, and the third most important thing, her space that he called her own, where she thought that she practiced her art. You can understand that dance, just by taking away the dance, just by saying that this woman is enticing by using her body, that same dance was taken and installed in bodies that were upper caste and that did not use it in the same way as an occupation. Of course, they also used it as occupation. They also danced, but they didn't call it occupation. They called it dedication. The whole idea of changing the relationship with the economics of it actually successfully destroyed the women and their arts. And this story is everywhere in India. And I would like you guys to think through it. And there are a lot of books now which have these kinds of stuff. If you want more kind of PDFs, I could send them to you. And if there is any question, I would like you to ask. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. People have already started putting questions in the message box. I'll just read them out to you, but just before that, if anyone wants, they can also raise their hand and unmute themselves and ask the question, if that's okay with you, Professor.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Well, the first question is from Afreen. She has asked, ma'am, is mosh also a form of protest?
Of course. Of course. It is. Actually, it's a huge amount. So the thing is that there are very many forms of ways in which you make the body face a certain format of, you know, a kind of application of force together. And wherever there is a kind of an ensemble practice, it becomes, that there is a very kind of a lot of similarity between a dancing ensemble togetherness and sports, or in martial art and in all the other forms. And so, would you like to? Do you have any further kind of um, input to give here? Do you want to talk, Afreen?
Uh, Ma'am, love no, sometimes hearing you. Also, there was one more
Sorry.
song I got to know about Mosh, this form of aggressive dancing from this rapper called Eminem.
Yeah.
So, I think in some cultures, I just wanted to know whether it can be used as a form of protest as well or not.
Of course. So anything, any physical act can be used as protest. Any physical act, that there's no rule. Of course it can. But if you see, one of the examples that is coming to my mind in answer of your question is, do you know of the day when almost 1100 South African children died in police oppression during apartheid in Soweto?
Ma'am, I've heard about apartheid, but not specifically.
Okay, so this was a day when school children had walked to the jails, and there were tanks, and they didn't walk. In most cases, because that togetherness had to be generated, there had to be singing, there had to be embodied movements, and that is what the children were doing together. There are many such spaces where resistance becomes a kind of a, because it needs a lot of uh, not only energy but also dare, you know, facing the fear, facing forces, unknown forces, facing a lot of uncertainties. So people have been known to sing, to dance, and that becomes the tool of resistance very often.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you.
Um,
Yes.
then should I'll just read out the next question in the chat box then.
Yeah.
Is that okay? So Sohini says, thank you, ma'am, for a thought-provoking talk. My question is, as much as dance is a way to claim identity, dances of marginalized communities have often been appropriated by the mainstream, the state and the corporate. For example, dances of the Adivasi communities. I am reminded of the book title, The Adivasi Will Not Dance by Hansta Shekhar. In such contexts, how would you see dance and identity politics?
So that's what I've been talking about, right? Because the whole appropriation is it. Even the Devadasi dance is an appropriation. The Devadasi form was not a kind of mainstream dance. It became classical. But also, there are many others like tourism sites where commercial use of the local forms of dance are now used as, which are actually danced in certain social occasions or ritual occasions, are now used as entertainment. There are also others, you see them very often, that in city schools people learn tribal dance. So they don't even know the name of which particular community's uh, cultural practices they are learning, but it is just called tribal dance. And then you will see that this is in Bollywood has specialized in it, constantly commercially exploiting things. So much so that in Rajasthan, from the Manganiyar community now actually says that many of the people who come now to listen to them, when they sing their original tunes, these people who come, the tourists, they say that you are not singing the correct tune. Sing it the Bollywood way. So Kajrare and all kinds of stuff are all taken from these songs, and then these versions, the Bollywood version, becomes what they have to sing. It is there is a kind of a double-edged sword, right? For a person who wants her or his art not to be shared, there's a loss in terms of occupation. On one hand, though, that this is making their performances popular, but on the other, they are losing their own ways of doing that performance. There are very many other ways you can look at it. So, say for instance, these the whole of the Northeast, many of the Naga festival of Hornbill festival that happens in December. It has all the Naga tribes who come together and perform their own performances, their particular. So the small community groups, the subgroups actually perform together. There's sports events, there are jamming sessions, music festival, there is dance and music, food. So, in every way, there is a certain format of curation. And these curators are usually who? These are civil servants who are in charge of the local academies, or the government servants, or the kind of the middlemen who take money for giving chance to certain people. So everything has now become a kind of a hierarchization of power, where this it actually is a negotiation of who will be seen, who will be given a chance. This is rampant in the way in which it goes down to the level of the smaller communities, more isolated communities.
Thank you, Professor.
Debangi Sanyal's question is very interesting and important, actually.
Should I read it out, ma'am, or would you prefer to just read it yourself?
Yeah. Can I answer it? It's because for them to know the art, it was actually a respectable profession for them, where they had their own agency. So, how do you conceptualize this agency if it is associated with a particular community of people? So, this is two particular castes, and one is the community is named the Isai Velalar community, and they had their caste positions. They were called Nitya Sumangali, which means that forever auspicious, because they were traditionally thought as married to the supernatural, the god, and therefore the god never dies, so there is no widowhood for them. They are forever auspicious. They were also, it is known that they knew a lot of languages. They could explain a lot of myths and stories. They were brought up with a lot of oral history, with a lot of oral cultural practice, oral transmissions of culture. Now, the thing is that it is to do also with the patronage. When once temple patronage stopped being as what should I say? taking care, it stops taking care of the Devadasi and making sure of to provide the hereditary performers with a continuous kind of a profession. It actually became difficult for them to sustain themselves, right? And it also, with this criminalization, of course they were not no longer able to claim their position as an artist. So in multiple ways, they lost their agency, they lost their voice, they lost their space. And instead, the people who actually claimed this space were who they were city people, right? They had very different ways in which they wanted this, the original aesthetic to be altered. Therefore there were so many ways in which people were altering their the original movements. There was no such um, surety of that what was carried to the city spaces. The, so, and this has happened in many ways in many communities. In the Northeast, if you think, the Meitei people's dances, and how that has been mixed with what the the bhakti movement brought to that part of the world, and how Sankirtan got mixed with the Meitei local cultures. In many manners, all of these patterns are different, but yet it actually shows a certain form of reduction of agency to the local. And instead, acquiring of a certain format of a central, it's almost like the traveling from the local smaller community space to be part of the national culture, so becoming kind of more visible, but not necessarily being a kind of agent of survival or visibility for the local community. It traveled to the center, but it also created its own community of practitioners. Is it okay, Devangi?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you so much for the
Okay,
answer.
and I have Rosa Ligia. I wanted to ask your opinion, not question. Do you think modern India gives individual space for artists to express their own ideas? It's a constant fight, actually. You one day one thinks that I have got my space, then the next day you wake up and see it is eroded by the time you have woken up. So, but it is of course true that at least this much we have been able to establish, that there are many contemporaries. There's not one contemporary, there is not one modern, and but yet there is always this kind of a effort to, stylistically almost structure, create a ghetto for each of these forms, and then make them, shut them into a box, so that, because humans are very uncertainty makes them irritable. So when they don't know what is modern dance, then they are angry with modern dance. When they don't know what is contemporary, so then what is contemporary? Contemporary is today. My today may not be with similar to yours. And if it is not, then it's fine. You can go ahead and create your own relationship with contemporary. That's what contemporary is. So That makes people very uncomfortable even now. That is why individual space is has to be fought for. One thing important is that because performances are communications finally, but at least if you want to be a public performer, if you want it to communicate something, then you have to be able to keep a kind of an understanding going and learning constantly as to what communicates and what doesn't. And maybe, I mean, not fix anything. Every time you try and do what excites you.
Um, and thank you so much, Professor. Uh, I don't. Well, we can take more questions if they come, but I don't see any coming in the message box right now. So, can I just tell you one of the questions that came up in the YouTube live? This question is, if we invoke Foucault's notion of the disciplined body, can dance, an embodied art, ever truly resist power? Or is it itself a site where power is rehearsed, internalized, and aestheticized through performance?
That's a fantastic question. Whoever has asked it, thank you. So, one of the things that I write is that, and there is another very good essay by Anurima Banerjee. Um, eh, Anurima Banerjee, yes. So, what we actually have been thinking of is, I write that why is it that dancers do not like doing things out of the box? Dancers actually love discipline. When they enter a dance school, the first day they are told that you will not question before you learn fully. So they actually give up on questioning. They start accepting. And therefore, this exactly what you said happens with them, that they become a disciplinable body even before they become a disciplined body. So, this disciplinability is something which stops them from asking questions or breaking out. Because in dance learning, the biggest oppressive format is that you will never be given a certain kind of a fixed goal. You will be told vague things like, say, for instance, look at how dedicated your sister is. You don't have that. Now, how much dedication is exactly the form of dedication? You don't know. So therefore, you keep on trying to reach that goal which is not there. And therefore, that's the best way of keeping people within discipline, right? So there is this control. The whole factor is that you have to control yourself. You have to can control your hunger. You have to control your weight. You have to control your looks. You have to control your how you do not appear tired when you are huffing and puffing. You have to you when you are sweating, you cannot show sweat. When you are you when you are out of breath, you can't show that. Everything has to be controlled. Imagine how much discipline one has to instill in oneself. So absolutely it is. And there is a very clear discipline and punish. So constantly it's re-establishing every day one self after a while nobody else has to tell you. You are self disciplining yourself. You are your oppressor. I don't know if I answered your question.
Thank you, ma'am. And with this, we have come to the end of today's session. Thank you so much, Professor, for this
Thank you.
riveting and very, very insightful lecture. Thank you also to everyone who took the time to attend the session. And have a nice
And
evening.
um, Afreen, which essay you are saying? This look at this. Can you see this book? This is a Rutledge book, a new book, The Dancing Body. Can you see it?
We
Yes.
I,
can't see it very clearly, ma'am, because
Yeah.
it's getting, yeah.
uh, The Dancing Body. I'll send you all the essays. Shall I
Okay.
send to Paulo?
Yes,
Uh,
ma'am. You can send. You can send.
Okay, so I will send all of them, and then you can. And it also contains Anurima's thing. That's about award Vapsi. Why did dancers not give back their awards? What stopped them? Is the question she asks there. And so I will send you all these 11 essays which were came out in South Asian history and culture first, and then now it's this book, The Dancing Body. It came out in 2025, Labor, Livelihood and Leisure.
okay, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for following up on me. And I was being so, such an escapist for a long while for this huge amount of work that I have taken on. Thank you very much for following up. Bye then.
Bye.
I'll
Have a
just
nice
send
day.
all of the things.
Okay, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
After you can follow up.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay. Bye.